Hey Goblin, you've been really practicing those war drums.
I'll bring the generic goblin noise!
This video is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. With free weekly content and free shipping over $100, you can save 5% site-wide by using the promo code MTGMudsta. I'm also sponsored by Face to Face Games, Canada's premier Magic the Gathering store. Using the promo code MTGMudsta will get you 5% off site-wide, with eligible orders getting free shipping Canada-wide. If you're looking for a direct way to help the channel, please consider joining my Patreon and becoming a member of the Generic Goblin Gang. Hey gang, just so you know, the Folio Portfolio number 2 is now available on Kickstarter. With sweet art like Sylvan Tutor, Chaos Warp, Bottle Gnomes, Infernal Darkness, Orcish Librarian, and Puzzle Box, there's sure to be something for everyone. It's running until November 18th at 10 PM PST, and be sure to use my affiliate link below when you pledge to back this project. Hey gang, and welcome back. Today we're joined by Shane, Ben, and Chris. Chris is playing as Brion's Stoutarm, which wants to steal creatures and then throw them in their owners' faces. Shane is playing Ephara, and his deck cares about blinking his creatures to get maximum value and maximum draw. Ben is playing Shigeki, which frankly I have no idea what it does other than play a lot of lands. And last but not least, I am rocking Shorikai, which is heavily focused on using vehicles to beat down my opponents. Shane wins the die roll and starts us off. Before he even draws, he gets to put out a Leyline of Anticipation. He then draws, plays a tap Prairie Stream, and passes. I play a Port Town, revealing a Plains from my hand, and cast Esper Sentinel. Ben just plays a tap Myriad Landscape. Chris has a Mountain for turn, and passes. Shane draws, plays an island, and passes. I play a Plains and cast one of my favorite vehicles, Unlicensed Hearse. Moving to combat, I hit Ben for 1 with a Sentinel, and pass. Ben plays a Forest and brings out his commander, Shigeki, and passes to Chris. Chris has a Plains and casts Talisman of Conviction, letting me draw from the Sentinel trigger. He then passes, and during his end step, Shane flashes in a Soul Ring and pays the 1 for the Sentinel trigger. Shane draws and casts Ephara, passing. My turn has me drawing and going to combat, attacking Shane with a Sentinel. Without a third land though, I pass to Ben. Ben plays a Forest and passes. Chris draws, plays a Mountain, and casts Brion. Shane draws, and in his main phase actually casts something, putting on a Smothering Tithe. He doesn't pay the 1, and I get to draw before he passes turn. I draw and don't pay the 2, and cast a Smuggler's Copter, and then go to combat. I hit Shane again for 1, and after that, pass the turn while discarding down to hand size. During my end step, Ben sacrifices the Myriad Landscape to go and find 2 forests, and before moving to his turn, I exile the landscape with the Hearth. Ben draws, and in response to the trigger, casts Harrow, paying the 1 to the Esper Sentinel trigger. He sacrifices a land and finds 2 more basics, but doesn't pay the Tithe trigger. He then plays a Forest and passes. Chris draws, not paying for the Tithe. He plays a Rugged Prairie, and going to combat, swings his commander at Shane to deal 4. He then casts Rings of Brighthearth and pays the 1 against my Sentinel. On his end step, Shane then flashes out an Eldrazi Displacer. Shane draws from his Ephara trigger on his upkeep and then draws for turn. He plays a Sea of Clouds and passes. I draw and pay for the Tithe trigger. I then go to my discard, and fearing a blowout from the Displacer on my Smuggler's Copter, I pass. On my end step, Ben activates Shigeki to put a Forbidden Orchard into play. Ben draws but doesn't pay for the Tithe. He casts Nisa's Renewal, paying the 1 from my Sentinel though. He goes and finds 3 basics and gains 7 life, and passes. Chris draws but doesn't pay the 2. He plays a tap Temple of Triumph, scrying 1 and bottoming it. He casts a Bloody Betrayal, targeting the Eldrazi Displacer, but Shane responds by flashing in Urian, exiling it and the Soul Ring until end of turn. Going to combat, Chris swings Brion at Ben, dealing 4. He then passes, with Shane returning the exiled cards at the end of turn. Shane draws from Ephara on the upkeep, and then draws for turn. He plays a Plains and casts a Flicker Wisp, exiling Brion until the end of turn. Going to combat, he swings Ephara at me and deals 6. He moves to his end step, with Brion coming back and exiling the Displacer and the Flicker Wisp. Shane then passes, while I tap my Hearse to exile Nisa's Renewal from Ben's graveyard. I draw, but don't pay the 2. I cast Blackstaff of Waterdeep, and use my Sentinel to crew up the Copter and go to attacks. I swing the Copter at Ben, dealing 3 and looting, but still without any lands, I have to pass. At the end of turn, Shane flickers Brion with the Flicker Wisp as it comes in. Shane draws from Ephara on Ben's upkeep, and Ben draws for turn. Ben then casts a Wilderness Reclamation and a Nevin Jarl's Disc. He then moves to his end step, untapping his lands. Shane draws again on Chris's upkeep, while Chris draws in his main phase. Ben then gives Chris a Spirit from the Forbidden Orchard, and Chris plays a Fury Calm Snarl for his land for turn. He then plays out a Halo Fountain, and doesn't pay for the Esper Sentinel to hopefully draw me a land. Going to combat, he swings Brion and the Spirit Token at me. After combat, he uses the Halo Fountain to untap Brion and make a 1/1 token. Shane draws from the Ephara trigger on his upkeep, and for turn. He plays a Nimbus Maze and casts a Glenelendra Archmage before moving to combat. He swings Ephara, the Flicker Wisp, and the Eldrazi at Ben to deal 12. He then moves to his end step and restarts his Brion loop as he passes to me. I draw, but don't pay for the Tithe. I finally hit my third land, and it's a Prairie Stream, and I pass. Moving to my end step, Shane goes to restart his Brion loop, and I respond by casting March of Swirling Mists, exiling 2 blue cards from my hand, so X is 5. I target Shane's stuff to try and stop the loop, but he responds by countering it with a Dovin's Veto, and I pass my turn. Shane draws on Ben's upkeep, while Ben draws for his draw step. He pays the 2 for his draw against the Tithe trigger, and then passes through to his end step, untapping his lands thanks to the Reclamation trigger. Chris draws, and overloads a Vandal Blast in his main phase. Ben goes to use the disc in response, while Shane responds with Disallow and targets the trigger. Shane counters the trigger, but responding to the Nevin Jarl's disc, I activate the Hearse to exile Shane's counterspells, and all the artifacts are then destroyed. Going to combat, Chris swings at me again with Brion and passes. During his end step, Shane once more exiles Brion. Shane draws on his upkeep from Ephara and for turn, and then plays an island. He casts a Soul Herder and goes to combat. He swings Ephara, Flicker Wisp, and the Glenelendra at Chris, while the Displacer goes at Ben. Chris chumps Ephara with a token, but takes the rest, and Ben takes the hit as well. After that, Shane passes. I draw and pay for the Tithe trigger. I then play a tapped Razortide Bridge, and pass. During my end step, Ben channels Shigeki to return his Nevin Jarl's disc. Ben draws and casts a Boundless Realms, going to grab a ton of basics and put them into play. He then uses Revive on Shigeki, and then passes turn, untapping his lands. Chris draws and pays for the Tithe. He then plays out a Phyrexian Processor, paying half of his life to it, and goes to 26. Moving to combat, he swings Brion at me again for 4, and then untaps him with the Halo Fountain and makes a 1/1. After that, he passes, while Shane continues to sit in the corner and play with himself by flickering his things. Shane draws on his upkeep and for turn, and then plays a Plains. He plays out Lavinia of the 10th and detains all small permanents. He swings his team at Chris in combat, dealing 14, and after that, passes with yet even more Brion shenanigans. I draw, paying my 2 like a good boy, and play an island. After that I pass, while I continue to watch Shane play with himself. Ben draws and recasts the disc. Shane responds by countering it with Glendalinda Archmage. Ben then follows up with a regrowth, returning the disc to his hand, and recasts it. Shane decides to sacrifice Glendalinda completely, countering it yet again. Ben then channels Shigeki to rebuy the disc and his 2 regrowth spells, and then casts the disc for the 3rd time, which Shane counters with a Fierce Guardianship. After that, Ben passes through his phases, untaps his lands, and passes, while Shane returns his board and flickers Orion again. Chris draws and plays a Sundown Pass, but with his board detained, has to pass as well. On his end step, Ben casts a Natural Reclamation, targeting the Smothering Tithe. This cascades into a Spike Weaver, while Shane does more Orion things, and the enchantment gets blown up. Shane draws on his upkeep and for turn, and plays a Riptide Laboratory. He then goes to combat and swings lethal at Ben, and Ephara goes at me. Ben has the Spike Weaver, however, and fogs the attack. After that, Shane passes, flickering Orion once more. I draw, but with nothing else to do, pass the turn to Shane while he continues his Orion loop. Ben draws and casts Grow from the Ashes, kicked for 2 more lands. He then casts a regrowth on Shigeki, and uses Revive on Natural Reclamation to return it to hand. Ben then casts the Reclamation and targets the Leyline of Anticipation. This cascades him into a Wilt, which also targets the Anticipation. Shane responds by flashing in Feldar Guardian, and blinks the Leyline to save it. Ben then moves to his end step, and floats a bunch of green mana before untapping his lands with Wilderness Reclamation, while Shane continues to flicker his creatures. Ben uses the floating mana before losing it to channel Shigeki and regrows his entire graveyard to hand, and passes. Chris draws, casting Basalt Monolith in his main phase, which at this point between the rings and it makes him infinite mana, but he's got nothing to do with it. With that, Chris passes, and Shane flickers his board again, and Ben responds by casting Natural Reclamation again, once more targeting the Leyline. This cascades him into a Tormod's Crypt, and blows up the enchantment. Shane draws 2 and plays a Mystic Gate for turn. Going to combat, he swings lethal at Ben again. And after cycling a Slippery Karst and Wilt, Ben finds no answers and dies. At this point, seeing Shane's rather hard lock in the game, Chris and I agree to mutually scoop it up to him. Game review time. I think this is one of the games where, even though I probably won't say anything during the game itself, I was a little bit burned out by that Azorius deck. Ephara just had such an efficient lock on card draw, and then once Lavinia was out, our other permanents, that it was really grindy. I really don't mind playing against a deck like that, and fortunately with this channel I don't think I have, but I would not be so eager to play against it again. Shorikai unfortunately once more kinda struggled. I really need to stop keeping hands with 2 lands and no mana rocks because this is just unacceptable. Chris's Brion Stat Arm deck really struggled with stealing creatures since the only ones that were mostly on the field were Shane's, and he basically didn't let anyone touch them. That being said, the other avenue of attack he had was literally attacking, but once more, Shane had bigger creatures than he did, so it didn't make a lot of sense. Ben's Shigeki deck basically seemed like a mono-green recursion deck where no matter what he did, he had some way to get it back, and it was a beautiful thing to see. He had a ton of lands, and if it weren't for the fact that Shane had like 700 counterspells, he might have actually gotten to do something in this game. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, Cool Stuff Inc., Multizone, Original Magic Art, and Alter Sleeves. But it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.